What's going on, folks? It's your boy again, back in the building. Dr. Sean Thomas here with episode 38 of the Be More Today show. We are back in the building. And it's Black History Month, folks. You know we're doing this big. I told you we're doing this big. Sir. And we're bringing on some great people today. For those of you who have been following us, Be More Today is a movement we've done everywhere, Facebook, Instagram. And we continue to put our podcasts out there. The book, my book, music, everything has to be YouTube based is on there. So we're pushing forward, giving you new content, more stuff every single day. So thank you for your support. People who've been on the podcast and giving us love all through this year and last year. Thank you so much for your support. We are now in 32 countries. So the Be More Today is spreading widely, and we're super excited for the love and support. And our sponsors who continue to give to us, thank you so much for just continuing to show us your love. We appreciate it. Just want to remind everybody that we're still doing our BMT for BLM 4-mile run, February 21st. It's a virtual run that can be done anywhere, but we are going to gather, if people want to gather, on the 21st. And the proceeds from the run are going to the ASALH. They are actually the founders of Black History Month. So the race is $30, but $10 of your race donation goes directly towards them. We're trying to raise $1,000 this month for their cause. So if you do want to get into the race, by all means, go onto our website, bemorettoday.com, and sign up for a virtual 4-mile run. You can join us on Strava for that, or if you want to join us in person, we will be in Brooklyn on the 21st doing a socially distanced run in honor of those who have come before us and for ASALH. My quotation for today is simple as always. Won't it be wonderful when Black history and Native American history and Jewish history and all of U.S. history is taught for one book, Just U.S. History by Maya Angelou. Folks, my guest for today is someone who embodies that. He is a historian of all trades, and I had to make sure I brought someone on the show who was going to give us some history today, because we need that. You know, we talk about motivation every single week, and we talk about the bonds that make us alike and also different. But during Black History Month, I thought it would be really important to bring on someone who could really just talk about what's happening now and bring it to a way that is palatable for us to actually recognize and understand. And my guest for today is none other than the infamous and amazing Albert Cook. Now, Mr. Cook has been a member of the Social Studies Department at Paltz High School for 23 years, where he currently teaches world history, AP American history, and Black history. Mr. Cook is also an instructor in the Urban Education Initiative at Vassar College, where he's co-taught classes on the legacy of Dr. King, the history of Black voter disenfranchisement, and the history and legacy of mass incarceration. He's lectured throughout the region on issues surrounding the history of African cultures and development of race and racism in North America. Now, Albert Cook is a history teacher for Paltz Central School, our Central School District, and he covered a number of topics from the mythology of biology of race, etymology and historical function of the N-word, and the ancient to late medieval African kingdoms and empires over the course of a 10-week on every single Tuesday from November to January on a radio show based in Kingston. And I heard some of these things. I heard actually a number of those shows, and I was super impressed. I said, in hearing these things, I had to have him on the show. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, pets included, please welcome to the stage my friend, my elder, my brother, from another mother, my man, Albert Cook.
Wow.
Albert, man.
I'm all right, Doc. I'm all right, Doctor. I'm very appreciative of that illustrious introduction. I guess I have to create a show and introduce you because, you know, you're quite the impressive figure, but I'm on your show today, so I thank you for that.
I appreciate you coming on. I know it's early, but we're doing this. And, you know, you and I have a history that goes back, way back, actually, when we are in the same church area. So we've done a number of church things together. When I was a youth leader at a church, you came and did my youth week of prayer for me. And I actually still have the, CDs, DVDs, the recordings of every single night that you preached at our church.
Wow.
I used to do those things. And I've always seen you as a prolific speaker, a prolific teacher, right? And as someone who wasn't always excited about learning history, because the history that I learned in school was not really about us ever. Seeing you and hearing you talk about and show your passion for history and for the things that we've seen in our past and how it applies to the present it inspired me to really want to get more and delve more into learning about cultures and the historical factors that make us who we are. So I had to have you on the show. I appreciate all you've done and continue to do in the Hudson Valley. And welcome to the Be More Today show.
Thank you so much. I'm really glad to hear that because you're not alone. I would say, in my experience teaching, about 30% of my students come into the classroom naturally excited about learning history. And I think there are a couple of reasons especially for Black youth. The reason that you pinpointed is exactly true. We are often disenfranchised in so many different ways. One of them, psychologically and emotionally, is by never hearing that we're connected to the human narrative, and that it causes us to be unmoored in our psychology, in our social relationships. We don't feel connected to the human story, and that psychologically is very damaging. I know people that control curricula around this country don't like to think about the fact that they're destroying young people while they're inspiring and building other young people, as a parallel to what was done with slavery. I mean, slavery was exactly that with our bodies, but still, intellectually, psychologically, it's being done for young Black children in most public school experiences around this country, where the absence of identity in the history is like exploiting the mind, because what it does is it prepares you to do servant jobs, which is exactly what slavery was supposed to do. So if you don't get an education that makes you feel connected to the community, often kids disengage, especially with history, but sometimes they disengage totally with school, because history is the narrative about life, and life, sometimes it hits students that way, and they disengage and they don't really do as well as they could, while other students get to identify in various points. Whether they have Irish history, they'll get a little bit of that. If they have Anglo ancestry, they'll get a little bit of that. And if you're a Western European descendant person, your identity is affirmed. You're a strong colonizer, and the colonizing story is told in such a idyllic way, to make it seem as if it isn't what it was, which was brutal and barbaric in many ways. But everybody else who interacts with the colonizer is the brute and the barbarian. And so it's a psychological game that is played to the harm of Black and brown minds and to the benefit of Western European descendant people. It's a sad testimony. What you told me, I know to be true experientially as well.
That's powerful. Now, I know that you are a history teacher. I know you've been teaching for the longest time. Actually, you teach at Paltz High School. I grew up in Walk Hill, so you're right down the street from me, which is funny.
Yeah.
What's your educational background, and what led you to want to teach history?
Yeah, I have a bachelor's of history and secondary education from Atlantic Union College, which is a parochial school in the New England area. It's now sadly closed, but I graduated from there in 1995. And then I went to SUNY New Paltz right here in New York State for my master's of science in teaching history. And then, yeah, educationally, that's my educational background. Yeah. But as far as what led me to be a teacher, I didn't intend to be a teacher. I had so many different ideas. I went to school thinking originally I was going to be a pastor, which of course requires teaching. Then I thought I was going to be a lawyer, which is somewhat related. These are still interests of mine. I'm still very spiritually driven, and still I advise a mock trial team at my school. So I kind of like feed that habit a little bit with that. But my advisor in undergrad, he asked me, you don't have a minor, you need a minor to get this bachelor's. And he kept, I thought it was annoying, but he kept persisting, which I'm very glad he did, for me to pick up a minor. And I picked up the education minor, actually just to get him to stop calling me and emailing me and things like that. And once I got into the classroom, I was shocked by the electricity that started flowing through my mind and the exhilaration of the experience. And fortunately, at that time, when I got home, my old high school had a sick leave replacement need that I filled. My mother probably had something to do with informing the principal about that. And and then I got a call when that year was up from the local principals in the area, because the principal of that high school said, "We're letting this kid go, but we don't really want to. You should call him." And I got a call, from Paltz High School. I interviewed there, and I've been there for 23 years.
That's crazy. Yeah, I
Yeah,
love it. I mean, sometimes that it just works out that way, right?
that's right.
And there's such an interesting link between pastors who want to be lawyers and lawyers who want to be teachers. So it just makes sense that you're in there still, because you're still doing your various things and various endeavors. I was reading your bio, and I was so blown away, as always, at what you're doing, especially in the Kingston area. I know you spoke at a rally that happened last year, and I actually saw pictures from that on Facebook. But I also read in your bio about the Urban Education Initiative. What exactly is that? What's your role in that initiative?
Yeah, the Dyson Foundation is a philanthropic group that likes to fund educational initiatives, mostly for poor, disenfranchised peoples in the country. They have a grant that they work with Vassar College with in the summertime, where they get students that are first generation college attendees that will be rising sophomores and juniors in high school. They like to target immigrant families. They like to target Black families, kids of color. And what they do is they have a cadre of professors and teachers that will team up to give them the college experience on the campus in the summertime for 2 weeks. So we create collegiate level courses. We lecture in a college hall, and we make the rigor. We choose the books at the same level that we would choose if we were teaching a college course. And they stay on campus for those 2 weeks, and they go to the cafe, and they go, they have their socializing, and then they have their time in the library, and they're supposed to experience it so they can get the confidence to know, even though my parents didn't go to school, the college, I can do this. And, that's what I've been doing for the last, I think, seven summers until COVID.
I love that kind of stuff. I love the giving back. I love the exposure. I was exposed to a number of programs that were kind of like that growing up as well. So I think anyone who has an opportunity to do those things, it just sets them up for success in the future. And I know you spoke about a number of things on your episodes. Again, there were 10 episodes you did for the Kingston radio show, and they were fantastic. They were phenomenal. I think I'm just putting it out there. I think you should have your own podcast, to be honest, just to share the information that you've been sharing. But I did want to get some of your thoughts on some of the shows, and I know we don't have all the time in the world to go through every single episode, but some of the topics you talked about were so poignant to where we are as a people now, what we're experiencing and seeing now, where we've been, and maybe even where we're going. So you spoke about the storming of the Capitol, and you kind of shared your thoughts on that, and of course the anger and the curiosity that comes with that from both angles. But what are your thoughts on, with the Capitol in mind, the current racial temperature in America, post the election, new administration, coming where we're coming from now, and going into now this 2021, people are still, things are still happening, right? There's still things on the news happening every single day, even with the Black Lives Matter movement and all that we've come from and going towards. What are your current thoughts on the temperature that's happening right now in the U.S. in terms of race relations?
Well, it's obviously been very hot lately, and but what I'd like to say is that the technology that we have, that every person has in their pocket now, is really not being given the attention that it deserves in creating the current climate, as far as white people understanding suddenly in their mind what it's like to be Black in America. None of the things, the police brutality, the poor public education around the country for Black folk, the economic disenfranchisement, the voting hoops and difficulties that Black folk have to face every single time that there's a major election, the gerrymandering, all these things that are suddenly on white fragility, and they're suddenly on the lips of progressive white America, has been the normal experience of Black folk especially if you live in a Black community or a Black poor community. Yeah, that's been the normal experience of Black folk since we've been here. And the cell phone and videotape, all these things is the only thing that's new. So I think the racial temperature is just more at the surface, but it's not different, and it's not the worst that it's ever been in the United States. I mean, it's amazing to me how powerfully American historians have changed the narrative about what really happened in the 1950s and 60s, because the people who were there are still alive. But they killed so many leaders, and they depend on us not really reading our own history, our own voices about that time period. So the autobiographies that came out of that time, a lot of times in schools, these are not the popular autobiographies that are assigned to kids to read. So Autobiography of Malcolm X by Alex Haley. Martin has an autobiography. Figures that are not as well known or not promoted, like Fannie Lou Hamer, who's my favorite person from that time period. Stokely Carmichael's story is brilliant and amazing. The organization of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, which is SNCC, that's the group that actually organized the March on Washington in 1963. Most kids, white and Black, don't know the fact that that was a multidisciplinary, multiracial, collegiate, young people driven organization that organized that March on Washington, where Dr. King did this famous speech. And they were just extraordinary. 3 of them were shot and killed down south after they went down to do voter drives. They were just as heroic as some of these other folks. Our story is diverse. The strategies were diverse. Young people were at the front lines almost all the time. There were Black colleges that had National Guard shoot them up at the same time that Kent State happened in May. And everybody knows Kent State, but 16 people were shot at in Morgan State University. So these things, it's just extraordinary that the narrative can be controlled and switched so quickly. And unfortunately, I have my opinions about what has happened in the Black community that's been destructive as well. And I'm both you and I are kind of representative of what happened when in the 1960s. A lot was done post 1960s to create opportunities for Blacks to get better education and to enter into the workforce as professionals, et cetera. And what a lot of our immediate ancestors did, not to blame them, but I'm just looking at what happened and the effects, is the talented 10th that W.E.B. Du Bois talks about in his book, The Souls of Black Folk, and other writings, left Black communities. And we left to live in white communities. And we are in we're in places where Black folks can't really afford. We're in rural areas, we're in suburban areas, and we go to white schools, and our money and our talents get reinvested in those areas. And what's good for the individual families, which is new opportunities and better education, because the schools are better where white kids are, is not good for Black communities as a whole. And a lot of leadership is gone. You know what I mean? And so I think that, we need to, as a generation, think seriously about what we're going to do about that. Charles Blow has a great article in the New York Times called, I think, The Remigration of Black Folk. I'll send you a link. But he's encouraging that Black communities remigrate. He was like, Atlanta needs to be the spot, and he's using it as an example because of the recent political upheaval that Black voters have created in this country. I mean, it's so extraordinary. Biden was picked by Black folks because the other candidates were trouncing Biden, and Black people in South Carolina were like, no, we're not trying to experiment. We don't have the time to do that. This person can beat Trump. We're putting him in office. Even though Black folk didn't necessarily want the agenda that they know Joe Biden will bring, they're not interested in any more Trump. And it turned the entire tide. Black votes in almost every country, every state after that turned the tide in a different direction. And so, I think this generation, our generation, the generation that comes after us, we have a lot to think about, and we have a lot to do with our children, about how they conceive or understand what it means to be Black in America.
Yeah, no, that's all accurate. And your kids are older than mine, clearly. but my daughter is going to be 6, and she's already talking about the difference between skin color, her classmates versus her skin color, and my skin color versus mommy's skin color, and what she is. So yeah, again, we're going to be in this time where we have some decisions to make in terms of what we show our kids. History has repeated itself in various ways, so it's good for us to make sure that we can take this to the next level. And yeah, I agree with you on the educational level. I'm the product of all white schools, of the richest and smartest, if you will, as the world looks at it, right? Ivy League, etc. And yeah, I sometimes I even feel myself that I want to be more involved in giving back, and that's why I do the things that I do community-wise, because I know I've been given a lot. I know that you've been given a lot, and it is poignant for us to recognize that we have to give back, to allocate our monies to Black-owned businesses and those kind of things, because that, if we don't think about it continuously, then we'll just fall into whatever place we're going to be in, house-wise, educationally, professionally, etc. And actually, going into my next question for you, because I know you teach New Paltz. And, as I know New Paltz is very Caucasian in nature. So is Wallkill, where my mom lives and where I grew up. And I know the students, as you talked about in your show, are mostly Caucasian. I know you live in Kingston, which, based on where Kingston is and where you can be, has more people of color, more minorities, depending on what sector you're living in or talking about. So how do you, as an educator, given the history that we have, given the books that schools and resources that schools have to give their students, how do you share history that is factual, and share the stories of others who are not always in the books to your students that are of certain race backgrounds?
Yeah, that's a great question. At first, as a young teacher, untenured teacher, very carefully, very carefully. But as I've grown, you have to establish a reputation. You have to establish credibility, even more than your colleagues when you're Black. But once I did that, those textbooks and materials become fodder for teaching excellent lessons. For example, I have a world history textbook that has 2 chapters on Greece and Rome. So Greece is in one full chapter, which has 4 sections, and Rome is in another full chapter that's 4 sections. Actually, it's 3 chapters, because there's one more Roman chapter after the introduction to Rome, of 4 sections of that, the Republic and then the Empire. And, there are so many cool stories that I tell the students, and I get them really engaged in it. And then we get to the African section, and there are 13 African kingdoms in one chapter. And so I have them do an analysis of that, like what's happening here? What does it cause you to think when there's 13 African kingdoms covered? And they say immediately, quite quickly, they didn't do anything. And I was like, exactly, right? Then I teach them, and I show them what Ghana, Mali, Songhai, Aksum, the Great Zimbabwe, the Kushites. I give them Nubians. I give them all this African history, and they're like, "What is that?" Black people. We call them Black people now. African people, historically, have been amongst the greatest people on this planet from the beginning. This race construction that's happened in the Americas has been devastating. That's the one devastating number one, and devastating number 2 is the colonization of Africa in the 1800s by the Europeans. There've been 2 very devastating impacts on African people. But prior to that, the story of the African continent is extraordinary. And when I give them taste of it, I can only give them taste of it because the curriculum doesn't allow me to stay too long. They are blown away. And then I ask them questions like, what do you think this curriculum is preparing you to think about people of color in your community and around the world historically? What's happening to your mind? And do you think it's fair that as children that you're being trained to think you're being objective, but you're being raised in a white supremacist ideology without hating anybody? What do you think that, I do have those challenging times and questions in my classroom. And, you would think that kids would resist that kind of education, but it's the engagement that you do, the timing of the lessons. At first they're shocked, and in that space of opening that you have, and you can talk very honestly, and they don't like it. They don't like it. They're pretty upset and embarrassed by it, And my Black history classes get packed out with white kids, 30 kids. I'm always telling them, the guidance counselors, that I can't fit any more kids in the class. So it's been interesting and inspiring and an energizing experience.
Personal question for you. Now, I know you teach in New Paltz, and you mentioned that most of your students are of a certain ethnicity. Do you feel like you have more of an impact in that classroom, or would you have more of an impact in a minority?
In the Black room?
Yeah.
Well, I'm there for a bunch of reasons. Number one, I would say it's about 5% Black at that school, and Black kids almost never have a Black teacher. And especially in a community like that, that's how it was for me. And I'm sure it was like that for you growing up in the Hudson Valley. And I'm there for those kids to see that you can have a Black teacher, and all the stereotypes that people tell you about Black folk can be broken in looking and thinking about one person. And I feel like that's an important thing for kids to see and understand. The other thing is that most white kids never see a Black person that breaks the stereotypes, and it's important for that to happen too. So I'm happy with the role that I play at that school in those two ways. But also, I'm about 8 years away from retirement, which is amazing for me. I can't believe how quickly it went. I started very young, 22, 23-year-old. So I have plans post New Paltz that involve an academy that I want to start that will be targeted specifically at Black kids, and especially poor Black kids in Kingston. Yeah.
That's very exciting. Not surprising at all, but very exciting that the academy is on your mind. And I was asking because I think about the schools that I went to, and my brothers didn't go to the schools that I went to. They went to other schools that were just different, right? And our educational roles were vast, but I do think it is. It's great to have someone who looks like you teaching. Like you said, it's also great to have someone who doesn't look like you, showing you a different perspective. And I think your impact can be felt on both sides, especially looking at the kids that you're teaching right now. I mean, I think that really sets the standard for their future. And you can really debunk stereotypes and debunk things that were probably taught at home at an earlier age that would really have an impact now, because at some point in time, as we get older, it's hard to break those foundational biases and those foundational messages that are taught to us as children. So I think that the place you're at now is a very good place to be.
I appreciate that.
And on that note, I'm curious, because even in your episodes, you talked about the N-word. Yeah. And I know for me, I don't use the N-word, and but people of color do use the N-word in various contexts, talking about music and even just relationally talking to each other in friendly terms. And depending on the person, if they're not of minority status, they also use the N-word, sometimes in friendly terms and sometimes not. What are your thoughts on how you educate the students that you have today and this generation on the history of the N-word and why we should or should not be using it?
Yeah, I'd love for people to check it out on radiokingston.org. Jimmy Buff Loves You is where you can find the episode. It's episode number 4 of a series of 10 on the N-word. So it could give you a lot more depth than I can give you right now on the etymology and history development of the word. But that was one of my favorite episodes because no one really gives students or people a chance to think historically and safely about, the N-word, which is one of the most electric and powerful words in the English language. It has the greatest range of any word that I can think of. On one hand, You can hear it used in the most fraternal and even affectionate manner between two people of color. That's my N over there. You know what I mean? And it's like nothing. It's like, it's all love. Like if you're in that environment and you're in that relationship, it really is, it's all love. And the power of that is extraordinary. On the other hand, it could mean I'm going to hang you from a tree. If I could do it, I would do that, which is an extreme. And then it can mean so many things in between. I mean, I've heard kids just say, like, if you're in an urban area right now, kids raised in hip hop, and they say that N-word over there, and they are meaning nothing. They don't mean brother. They mean this guy. You know, it's a neutral, unaffected in their mind term until they get into a professional environment. They realize that it's not neutral and unaffected. You know, but the reality of it is that the N-word is not the problem, and this is what I mean about controlling the narrative. See, what my experience has been is that most white folks are uncomfortable with the legacy of racism, because what happened in the 1950s and 60s, what Dr. King's real impact was, in my view, is that he shamed white America because his moral integrity was so high and his eloquence was so beautiful. The power of his example was so great that most people as individuals, when they looked at his life and they listened to him speak, they felt ashamed of their own hatred and their own sentiments about Black people. It embarrassed them. And so suddenly you had this shift that was more than the legal shift that occurred. That's the one we usually look at: 64 of Civil Rights Act, 65 Voting Rights Act, 68 Civil Rights Act. We look at the achievements, but we don't look at the psychological shift that happened in this country, which was, it's embarrassing to be the ugly, violent, barbaric racist that was exposed by the peaceful marches. Okay. So something really scary happened. America didn't stop being racist. It stopped liking being a racist country. And so people started being polite while justifying racist institutions, practices, and policies. And the embodiment of that polite racism and systemic and personal was like Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan could speak eloquently. Ronald Reagan could justify cutting social programs in countries, in states all around the country. And those things were having very specific targeted impacts. And he would have secret meetings with his cabinet, and they would craft ways not to sound monstrous, but to have the same effect of diminishing the power of the civil rights movement, which was the reason for the rise of the white evangelical movement in the 80s that elected Reagan. And we don't like to think about those things in America. I'm saying we. Sometimes I collectively say we so that I can connect with a white audience, because that's usually the audience I'm speaking to, right? So that they can recognize that their support and what's happened to them is directly impacting people like me, you know? And that politeness makes them very uncomfortable with hearing the N-word, right? But what Black people have done with the N-word over time was to say, you know, that word is a symbol of the fact that you can control my entire identity and do anything you want with my body, but you can't do anything you want with my mind. And and Black folks transform that thing from the tip of the spear to an affectionate hug and smile and do it with rhythm. That's why it's so important that it's in hip hop that put it out there. You know what I mean? Because art is something that's very difficult to control. And the more you press me, the more beautiful my art is going to be. The more powerful my art is going to be. You see what I'm saying? And when you look at original hip hop, that early hip hop that is really coming from Black folks, not corporate, it's not connected to white power, it's not connected to white institutions. That stuff is beautiful, powerful commentary. It's the bards, it's the oral historians of our culture and urban Black communities. It's amazing. You know what I mean? It's a self-soothing party music. That's what it was. It's storytelling about what's happening in the hood and in my family and my mind as a young Black man. It's beautiful stuff. You know what I mean? And once the white institutions got involved with it and they could make money off the caricatures of Black violence, you know, and NWA capitulated. I always view, I respect what those young men in Compton had to experience as their everyday life, but to get paid to sell to white kids all over this country, the caricature of us that already existed, I still view it as harmful ultimately. You know, it shifted the narrative on rap music and in hip hop. And a lot of Black kids that would have been poets that were telling our story, you know, sold like Snoop, like sold the caricature because he knows that white people will gobble that up because there's already an existing stereotype about our violence and our menacing nature. And, you know, you get rich and it's cool for you as an individual, but you got to think about the way the police react to that in the hood for everybody who's not making that exploitative money off of that, you know, and uh, then you get white people all over the country that feel justified when they see police brutality because they think of Black boys just like they think of them in the caricature of gangster rap, you know. And so I look at white institutional systemic racism in that, and I blame them for that and exploiting them, knowingly saying we're not going to sign you singing this, we're not going to sign you talking like this. You gotta change your flavor, or you're not getting the record. I blame them definitely for that, but I also blame to a lesser extent Black artists who took the money because even though, you know, to me, I'm sitting comfortably, and it sounds judgmental for me to say that, but the impact was so powerful. The imagery that was sold to white America, especially white suburban America, which is very powerful part of the social and political and economic elements of this country. It's hard to erase the imagery when you turn on the TV or when you listen to the songs. And these folks don't have Black people in their circles. They don't know nothing about Black culture and Black communities. And so they can't tell that it's like, you know, white people can get away with that stuff. You know, they can do death metal and heavy metal, and nobody thinks that that's white culture. It is white culture, but nobody thinks that every white person is like that because they interact with so many other white people. But when you're in a country where the percentage of us is only 13%, and most white people are not interacting with Black people, you can't afford to send out a caricature because that's what they think they know. And it's deadly. It's literally deadly to us, you know. And it's just the same thing. It's not, you know, my judgment. Sometimes I'm a little harsher with my judgment on that because it's something in reflection that we figured out, that at least I did, you know, because looking back at what happened with all of the intelligentsia, all these smart Black folks leaving the hood, and not staying and buying up the dilapidated buildings in those neighborhoods, and increasing the property values, and therefore increasing the property tax, and therefore improving the schools that they went to. You know, that you know, Marcus Garvey's collective economics message, those things were not emphasized in the schools that we went to. So we're not thinking that way. We you know, the media and even the messages from the places where we do control, in some cases our churches, etc., really sold the idea that education and living in the suburbs and replicating white life was the marker or the standard of success for Black success. And that's just not our message that we needed to be receiving at the time. But, you know, if you isolate Dr. King and you focus on a very narrow band of only some of his messaging, and then you black out everybody else. You black out the Nation of Islam, you black out the Panthers, you black out the United Negro Improvement Association, that's Marcus Garvey's movement. You black out the First March on Washington by A. Philip Randolph. You black out the Niggerati, which is an intellectual movement during the New Negro movement in Harlem, where Zora Neale Hurston and some of these other folks with just sharp intellect and brilliance, you know, a heavy critique of what white America was doing and about systemic racism early. I'm talking about 1920s, 1930s in America. Like, most people just don't know these things. And when you block them out, Tulsa, Oklahoma in the 1920s, like, you don't recognize that our heritage is extraordinary in this country, not just in the past, but in this country. Brilliance, economically powerful, philosophically powerful. The guy who came up, you know, the Harlem Renaissance is not even our name for that time period. When our people were there in Harlem, our ancestors, Caribbean, African American, Afro-Cuban, it was such diversity, right? When we were there, we called it the New Negro Movement. And the New Negro movement, one of the slogans was, the new Negro is here and he is not afraid.
Mm.
I mean, if you were to say that to most Black people today, they would not know what you're talking about. The Harlem Renaissance, the difference between saying the Harlem Renaissance sounds like painting and dancing and smiling. It's comfortable. When I say the New Negro movement, you mean like, oh, well, what's the new attitude? And it's extraordinary. If you put in the New Negro movement and Google image it today, you're going to see marches in New York City of Black professional and middle-class folks in Black neighborhoods saying things like, I am a man. I am a man. And then you understand jazz music in a completely different context, which was part of it. My aunt yelled at me about saying that it was just an argument to white people, we can do music too. That was a part of it, but it was a much larger movement. I mean, it's a preservation and an innovation and a lot of things African, but jazz music was revolutionary music, just like hip hop is revolutionary music. But we don't know our own very immediate history, the very immediate history, like the way that Black people even walk, that classic bop that black guys do in a lot of places. Everything that we did was about a statement that you can't control everything about me. You can't make me do everything you want. So if you walk that way, I'm gonna walk this way. If you sing that way, I'm gonna sing this way. If you dress that way, I'm gonna dress this way. It's been, we have been preserving our identity and our culture in so many different ways and so many powerful ways, but we don't control the story about ourselves. And so we don't have a cohesive narrative to give to our children, and it's a dangerous thing to be without identity and to be without history, and for kids to grow up that way. I mean, the psychological hoops that you jump through until you become stabilized in your own mind to deal with the attack on your psychological condition, sometimes it destroys kids. So yeah, the N-word is not, to me, the problem. I do at the end, to finally answer your question, I put a circle on the board, okay? I put a circle on the board, and this is for my white kids and for the few Black kids in the classroom who are often sitting and smiling, rocking back and forth when I'm doing this lesson. And I love that because there's a soothing and a healing that's happening for them, a validation that's happening for them, and a challenge. I always was in the classroom and the pressure and the challenge was on me. Anytime you're talking about race, I love spinning that because the reality is that Black people didn't make this thing. We didn't do this, and it's not our job to unmake it. It's white people's job to unmake it, right? But I put a circle on the board and I write all of the things that are systemic racism in this country. I write all of them. I write police brutality, unequal education. I write banking practices, everything that we've been learning in the course, right? And then I write the N-word in the circle too. And I put over the circle, I say systemic and institutional racism. That's what's in the circle. You want to add? And they give me everything. They give me history. There's slavery, Jim Crow, Black codes. They start blowing it up, right? And I'm like, yeah, that belongs in the circle. Great. And then I take an eraser and I erase the N-word. And I say, what did I do to institutional racism? They go, oh, nothing. And I say, exactly. This is a narrative of white comfort. I don't want to hear the ugliness. That's what the N-word represents. But guess what? In Black communities, that's love. So that's something that's wrong with your community. You see what I'm saying? So I put it in and it does nothing. I take it out, it does nothing. I says, let's stop talking about censoring the N-word, because what they really are doing in many instances is trying to stop Black men from psychologically, Black women, Black boys and girls from psychologically protecting themselves from the humiliation that's associated with that word. So that's what creating a fraternal expression of it does. You know what I mean? It buffers. It says, I'm stopping you from making you think that you can tell me that I'm nobody and I'm nothing. Because I can say I'm somebody who's loved using the same word. That's what that's for. So now they want to turn around after having creating all the systems that create the power of the word, come around and tell you can't say it. That's what that's about. You know what I mean? So I reject it. And I'm not down for that. And people who go around trying to tell young Black boys and girls that they can treat them like N-words, but they can't say the N-word. I'm like, no. You're not going to pull that off. As long as I'm around, you're not going to pull that off because the young kids don't really fully understand what they're doing and saying when that happens.
Mm, mm. Folks, if you're just joining us, episode 48 of the Be More Today show. I'm here with Albert Cook, social studies teacher at New Paltz High School for 23 years, historian of so many things, elder in his church, and a pillar in his community. And we're just talking about Black history on all formats. Albert Cook, I'm curious on what your thoughts are on. You mentioned your students talking about the N-word and music and how that definitely affects our communities and how it affects the police in terms of how the police interact with our communities as well. There's been a lot of talk about police reform, defunding the police. Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? What are your quick thoughts on the defund the police movement and if we should be doing it or not we should be doing it?
Well, I'm actually serving on the New Paltz Police Reform Steering Committee, and we're discussing a plan that needs to be submitted to Albany about what's going to happen in our local town concerning the police. And, there's a debate to be had. Defund the police is a chant that works well and expresses a sentiment in protest. Divest and invest doesn't sound as rhythmic and as powerful. Divest and invest is more like what needs to happen, which is you need to think about how to decrease the amount of money that's spent in militarizing police and increase the amount of money that develops institutions and practices that support Black bodies and Black communities. And defunding the police is not an effective slogan, in my view, because what it does is you have partners. The partners are white people. Okay, as Black folks, your partners are white people because white people hold the power, the handle of power in almost every community in the United States. And if you tell those folks, what the police do for those folks is protect their property, they protect their businesses, and they protect their homes, and they protect their schools. They do all those things for them. Now, that's not the same thing for Black people, but that is definitely the reality for white people. So if you say defund the police, those white people immediately are no longer being partners with you because those are the soldiers that protect their lifestyle. And so you have to talk about it in ways that people hear you and people understand you and that are willing to work with you. And so, I remember the first time I was out in a Black Lives Matter march, and that shout went out, and I was standing next to some of my students as it went out, and one of my students turned to me and says, "Defund them?" And I was like, yeah, what I think they mean is demilitarize the police, but that doesn't sound as good rhythmically as we're marching as defund the police, demilitarize the, nope, it doesn't work. So you know what I mean? It caught on and it went all over the place, but now people have to step up and do what they said they were doing. And we're creating, in the reality, now we're creating a very challenging work for folks because you don't want people to look like they were lying or people that are double crossing folks. That's not really how it works. But, that's just, it's part of the hard work that people have to do. There are a lot of ideas on the committee that I'm on that we're thinking about, but almost all the ideas cost more money. They're talking about social workers and psychologists and all that kind of stuff. It's going to cost more money. So defunding doesn't work if you're going to radically change how emergency service respond. That means you're hiring people, not decreasing funding. So what you really want to do is stop the militarization, change the disposition, change the culture of policing. You get rid of the folks that think that they're warriors and not protectors, and educate. All those things are going to cost money. You're going to hire people like myself and Sean Thomas to go into communities. You understand what I'm saying? So defund is not really the answer. I want to hire folks that are different. I want to put Black bodies and Black faces. I want to put Black professionals in. I want to put mental health people. I want to put social workers. I want to put different folks in emergency responses so that police don't have to come with guns and law enforcement all the time to every situation. And I also want the police to be culturally aware of who they are and what historical role they played. I want the police to also be conscious of the fact that they have institutional and personal biases and racism as a natural result of growing up white in America. I want that to be a reality, but I don't want to defund. I want to I want the protection to be equal, and I don't want predatory and prey behavior from the police officers.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's powerful, and I agree with that. I think a lot of people are on the fence still about all those different thoughts, but I do think it is about allocations. And money talks. We know that. We've seen that happen in all kinds of countries and in every single profession. So we'll see how these next 4 years go in terms of all those things. But I'm glad that you're on the board for that where you are. And I think if anyone should be in that area and in your environment, it is you. I mean, you know so much about both sides of the spectrum. So being able to bring that to the table, I think will be beneficial for your community for sure. I don't know if you know, I wrote this book, Be More Today, a 40 Guide to a Better Version of You. And the whole podcast and the whole movement is about being more. And you, my friend, I have you on the show because you embody that in so many ways. You always have since I met you years ago. So I asked everybody on the show, and you were number 48 for me.
All right.
When you hear the phrase "Be More Today," what does the phrase "Be More Today" mean to you?
Yeah, and I just want to shout you out for that, Sean. I mean, you've showered me with compliments, and I really do appreciate them because I love you and I respect you. And we go back a long way. But you're a very impressive young man yourself. What you've accomplished, first academically, athletically, spiritually, socially, civically. I mean, I see you and I affirm all of that because it's been inspirational. It's been very powerful to watch you as a father, as a husband, everything. You were breaking boundaries in your time that, a lot of us didn't even understand and see. And I look back at them and I'm very proud of you. I'm very proud of you. I'm proud to know you and proud to just know your story, even if I didn't know you. So Be More Today is exactly the trail that you've been blazing in your life. And that I feel that I've been trying to do as well, which is like be your best self in every moment of every day. Like find your calling. What are you supposed to do? I found out by accident that I'm a teacher. I'm a teacher every single place that I go. I teach in a pulpit. I teach in my home. I teach on the street. I teach in my classroom. I teach wherever I am. That's what I've been doing for a long time. And I know that that's what I'm supposed to do. So I do it to lift up other people, edify people, strengthen people. Don't overlook anybody. Be humble enough to learn, even if you're a teacher, from anybody. I learned some of the greatest lessons that I've ever learned from 4-year-old children. You know what I mean? So being more is always looking for those opportunities to work in your lane, with your gifts to do good for people that are in your circle. And your circle could be 3 people, your circle could be a couple hundred people, your circle could be millions of people, but use your gifts to strengthen those folks, lift them up, and always look for the person who's the target. Don't feed the people that don't need to be fed all the time. Everybody needs to be fed. Everybody needs to be fed, but not everybody needs to be fed all the time. Some people are fat and they get everything that they want. I'm talking metaphorically right now. You know what I mean? Feed people that aren't being fed. Look for those folks, because if you strengthen the weak, you strengthen everybody.
Powerful. Powerful. I appreciate your sentiments. Clearly, I respect you at bounds. So you're in the love I have for you, and I'm glad that we were able to connect on the show today. Any final tips you want to share with the audience? I mean, you know so much. I'm always just so impressed about your depth of knowledge when it comes to history, because I don't have that. And I wish I had that. I have that, I guess, in my profession, and it's your profession, so I know you have that. But there's also a certain knack to the passion you have behind that. So I had to have you on. I just want to know any tips you want to share with listeners about anything Black history related, anything that we talked about today, or anything that you're trying to do moving forward. I mean, like you said, that school you're going to be doing after your retirement, that foundation is going to be super excited. So I'm happy to hear about that, and we'll have to have you back on the show to talk about that when it actually happens. Sure. But any final tips you want to share with the audience as we close?
Yeah, last thoughts would be for Black folk in the audience specifically. I think number one, we need to read our stories in our voices. Find Black authors, especially those who went through the mid-20th century and early 20th century struggle. There's a lot of literature out there. W.E.B. Du Bois is amazing. Zora Neale Hurston is amazing. I'm talking about folks that aren't as commonly known. What's his name? I'm Not Your Negro. Come on, what's his name? It's not Paul Laurence Dunbar, even though Paul Laurence Dunbar is amazing. Claude McKay is amazing. I'm Not Your Negro. He was a gay Black writer. James Baldwin, amazing. Like Ta-Nehisi Coates, that the author that writes now, he feels to me like a James Baldwin. He's got like this emotional, fiery top layer, and then this deep intellectual second layer. And we just need to read our own voices and understand where we came from recently, our recent history, understand our recent history. Read Marcus Garvey's stuff. And if you don't want to read it, listen to his speeches and read the transcripts on YouTube. I mean, get acquainted to where we come from. And then also the last thing is that don't think of civil rights as simply political and social rights. I think one of the other traps that we've fallen into is that we focus far too much on people respecting us socially. We want to be respected. But the thing is that respect comes after you do things that are respectable. And the economics of civil rights is the key for us. And we need to understand our collective economic power and operate intentionally around those things, because political power, all law, all politics is built on protecting economic investments. That's been the way of the United States, at least since its colonization. You have property and power, economic power, and then you make laws to protect it. That's what white people have been doing. Black people need to understand those principles, and we need to understand that success, we buying clothes and cars, etc., is not necessarily a marker of success, because you can't give them to anybody else and they degrade in value. But you buy buildings and refurbish them while you walk around in jeans and a t-shirt and sneakers, but you own the building that you're walking next to, and then you have a business that comes out of there, and then you can hand that down to your children and they don't ever have to sell it. And then the ideas and the power and the economics that come out of that, and you start buying up the blocks that you lived on, all those dilapidated buildings that the government is holding and banks are holding and they want to get rid of. Those are the kinds of things economically that we need to think about as Black folks, and building equity and power. And then out of that, when the people that have elected office have to have meetings talking about what are they going to do in this block, guess who they have to invite? Because you own the block. Now you're sitting down and suddenly you have a voice that's political. And after you do that, guess what happens? Socially, people look at you and they realize, oh, that's your name in your building. And the respect that you were seeking this whole time, that's where it comes from. You know what I mean? So that's my advice. We need to think differently.
Albert Cook, where can people follow you, your journey, your teachings? Where can they follow you?
Sure. I'm on Facebook with my full name, Albert B. Cook II. You can search me there and friend requested. I'm thinking about making a new Facebook page just for this kind of stuff, where I can interact with folks on this level and not just my personal page. I'm on Instagram, but not that much. Same name, AB Cook II. So yeah, RadioKingston.org has the 10 episode series under Jimmy Buff Loves You. He's the host of the show, and those would be great if you could check them out. I'd love to have your feedback. You can check them out on my Facebook page. They're linked throughout it, but you could also just go straight to the radio website.
Yep, and I'll add the radio website to the show notes for sure. I heard most of them, folks, and they are dynamic and inspirational and phenomenal. So please check them out as well. Albert Cook, thank you so much for joining me on this show today. Black History Month is now amazing because of you. And I appreciate, again, all your work and support and your words of encouragement. You've always been that pillar for me. So thank you so much for making the time to be on this show.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for reaching out, Sean.
No problem. Folks, hopefully that quotation from today, Maya Angelou said, "Won't it be wonderful when Black history, Native American history, and Jewish history, and all U.S. history is taught from one book, just U.S. history?" Albert Cook is doing that. He's showing his students how to really see through the text, and he's adding to the narrative, he's adding to the literature, and he's making a new history for these people to know. And I think that, like he said, get out there, read these books. I'm reading Obama's book right now for the second time, and just read the books. The books are out there, audio books, whatever you have to do. They're on YouTube, they're everywhere. Know your history, continue to make sure that you can control the narrative that's going on in this country, and just stay educated. As we conclude Black History Month very, very soon, just continue to stay inspired And thank you so much for joining us on this show today. Be More Today. Again, we're everywhere at BeMoreToday.com for the book, the music, the podcast. If you want to be a BMT supporter, send me an email, BeMoreToday. That's number 2day@gmail.com. You can follow us on all of our socials, Instagram, YouTube. You know what's going on. You know how we do. The Words for Life podcast is always still coming on every single Wednesday, so check that out as well. And folks, happy Black History Month. Stay proud, stay Black, and stay whatever you are. And as we always say, have a good day, have a good night, have a great life, and continue taking yourself to greatness to be the best version of you. Peace.